Please put your questions in chat, and then I will read those after Neil's presentation. Our speaker today is from the Environmental Center, Neil Baunsgard. Neil studied at Western Washington University. He majored in environmental studies, economics, and energy policy. He's been with the Environmental Center since 2015. His presentation today is really timely because earlier in the year, as we've all heard, GM is moving to an all-electric fleet by 2035 and phasing out all of their diesel and gas-powered vehicles. When Neil isn't geeking out about LED lights or electric vehicles, he loves to spend time with his family here in Central Oregon. He loves to spend time in the outdoors, either cross-country skiing, trail running, or rock climbing. Please welcome Neil Baunsgard for this very interesting talk about electric vehicles.
All right, thanks for the intro. I hope is my audio working?
It is, it's working fine, Neil.
Great, a little high stakes poker to just jump right in, but glad that's working out, and glad to be connected with you all. Yeah, as was mentioned, feel free to write questions as they come up in the chat, and I will either address them at the end. We can kind of do a little bit of a Q&A at the end, and I definitely like spending a lot of time in the Q&A, and am happy to answer whatever questions you have or hard questions. I'm also happy to follow up afterwards too. So it's gonna take me a second to get my presentation up. So just give me a second there. I think. Hold on a second. Have you on the wrong screen. Okay, are you seeing the big transportation electrification slide now?
We are.
Okay, great. Wanted to make sure that I was looking at you all too. So thanks again for having me. Again, my name's Neil Baunsgard, and I work for the Environmental Center here in Bend, serving the Central Oregon region. If you all aren't familiar with the Environmental Center, we're located on Kansas Avenue in downtown Bend, close to the McMinimans and Bend Lapine School District office. And what we do as an organization is work to really try to create the systematic change to help embed sustainability into the way that we live and work in the region. And the projects that I work on the energy challenge are really focused on energy, where it's coming, how we're using it, and how we can kind of accelerate new technology or better technology in our built and transportation world. So a little bit about today's presentation. The focus is pretty broad. So it is, we're going to be talking about kind of at first, why are we talking about transportation in the first place? We'll talk a little bit about, we'll talk a lot about electric cars. We'll talk about other electric mobility, like electric bikes and electric buses. And then we'll have some significant amount of time for Q&A at the end, as well as there are a couple of questions that came up earlier around electric mobility and where electricity is coming from, range, and end of life that hopefully I'll touch on, but then I'm happy to have a discussion further on as well. So the first question is why transportation? I don't have this cited on here, but this is a chart just showing where average carbon emissions from the average American come from. So transportation is usually, depending on how you do the calculation, is usually about a third of, between a quarter and a third of the average American's carbon emissions. And so that's one main reason that we pay a lot of attention to transportation. But also beyond energy and beyond climate, transportation impacts our daily lives pretty significantly, both here and both in larger cities. Having a transportation system that is affordable, equitable, and clean and safe is just an important thing to pay attention to.
Excuse me just a second, Neil.
Yep.
We're able to also see your notes. I wasn't sure if you
Okay.
wanted us to see full screen on your slides or also your notes.
I will switch to the other screen then. Okay, now do
Perfect.
you see? Okay, great. Okay, so another piece of why transportation is important is affordability. Behind housing, transportation is the second largest area of spending in most households. And so focusing on long-term affordability and transportation is important. And this is kind of a tricky space too, just considering that transportation needs are very different between different folks, but wanting to make sure that we can get around affordably and cleanly. So we'll start with talking about electric bikes. They, as the slide kind of demonstrates, they work like regular bikes, but they're basically just better. Most electric bikes operate as pedal assist bikes, and so how that works is you'll have a standard drivetrain like a normal bike, and they can come in lots of different forms. But then you have a battery and a motor that just give you a little bit of an extra boost when you're pedaling. And so the first time that I rode an electric bike, it really felt like I was just really strong. So it makes it easier to go up hills, easier to go further distance, carry groceries. And a lot of folks are just a lot more comfortable on an electric bike, getting started from a stop or crossing a crosswalk. Some of those pieces are just a little bit easier. So it's an image of an e-bike there. And the real piece that, there's been a lot of research on electric bikes because it's been growing a lot recently. And the real message that we found as the e-bike world has grown is that people with electric bikes bike 4 times more than when they had a normal bike, and that's accounting for what they did prior to purchasing the electric bike. And so this is a really good transportation option that a lot of people could be comfortable with. Another difference with electric bikes is who bikes. The regular bike share on this slide shows 75% of people biking are male. Once you jump to an e-bike, you're seeing more equal representation or closer to equal usage with electric bikes. This is why people bike. So there's a survey. These are all the people that took the survey, but it's people are riding e-bikes pretty much everywhere now, and they're using it both for exercise and recreation as well as a transportation tool. So both as a tool and a toy, and you still do get a lot of exercise on an electric bike. You just kind of get to choose how much you want. So if you don't want to show up sweaty, you can do that, or if you want to go and get some exercise in, you can also ride your bike, so you get that benefit as well. I try to avoid a ton of data and graphs in my slides, but I thought that this was a pretty cool one to see. So I think I can annotate. Let me know if you all can see this. So when the first bar, this orange bar, is people that rode a standard bike before switching to an e-bike. The darker orange is people that are still riding an e-bike, and then the green bar is people that switch to an e-bike. And so you can see really on the frequency scale that these are kind of the big outliers, where people that shifted from their regular bike or to an e-bike just started riding them way more on a daily or weekly basis. Okay, clear all drawings. Okay, so that's a little bit about electric bikes. Yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that in the future. I had another slide in a different presentation about the different types of bikes. This has grown a lot to where there are bikes that in any kind of bike that you might ride now, including like a step through or a cruiser or a tricycle, they are all being offered as electric options now. We also have really good partners in Central Oregon that have e-bikes to be able to try out. Bend Electric Bikes downtown, Pedigo, and then there's a new e-bike shop in Northwest Crossing as well. So next we're going to shift to talk a little bit about electric buses. One of the big projects that I'm working on right now is helping fleet managers for school districts explore how a transition to an electric school bus might fit within their operations. This is a really exciting opportunity. Imagining one of the images that I have about school buses beyond being an awesome transportation option is when I would come out of school every day, it would smell really bad because the diesel pollution while they're idling in front of the school is pretty significant. So electric school buses are a cool opportunity to both combine the potential cost savings of an electric drivetrain with the air quality benefits of not having a combustion vehicle around children. So it's an exciting growth area. It's still pretty new, but we just announced that Ben Lapine School District, through some grant work that we helped them with, was able to buy their first all-electric school bus, similar to the one that's on here, and they'll be getting delivery this summer. And then we're also running a electric bus tour that, because of COVID, is pretty limited in who can come to it. But we're visiting school districts all next week. We're doing the Oregon's first electric school bus tour. So we're driving it all throughout Central Oregon, the Columbia River Gorge, and then down with the I-5 corridor to get folks exposure as more funding becomes available. Transit's another area that we're seeing a ton of growth in. I heard a statistic a few years ago that was pretty mind-blowing. The question was just about where the market is going. And somebody asked, this was in 2019, and they asked a panel, when do you think we'll reach a point where new buses purchased, more will be electric than fossil fueled? And it was a cruel question that they asked the panel because the answer was 2019. It's already happened. So globally, we're seeing this shift, and it's slowly happening here as well. Cascades East Transit is doing a feasibility study right now, but both the technology is there, and it allows an already good source for transportation options and per passenger kind of efficiency to be that much better when it's being powered by clean electricity. So those are kind of the first two categories of electric transportation, and then we'll spend a good chunk of time on the on electric cars. So first, a little bit of an overview. I've been working in this space for a few years, and it's really shifted over time. At first, when I would talk about electric transportation, electric cars, people thought of this. They thought of something super futuristic that they really had no connection to. And that has definitely shifted. So that was kind of the first thing that people would think of. Then the next stage that people would think of is a very expensive luxury vehicle that was inaccessible. But we're really at a point now that things have evolved a lot over the past few years. And although it's not common consciousness, some of my goals today is to try to get the association, when you think of an electric vehicle, to think of something like the Hyundai Kona or an electric bus, and really just some of the more regular and standard vehicles becoming electrified over time, because they're already here now. You just don't see them as much as you do some of the flashier vehicles. All right, so then the next piece is how they work. If you can imagine back 10 or 20 years ago when the Toyota Prius came out, it was pretty confusing to understand how a hybrid works. But now we're at a point where a lot of people know what a hybrid is, and we're just in a new point of having to explain how fully electric and plug-in hybrids work. So here's a little bit of an example of that. An electric vehicle, a fully electric vehicle, has a battery instead of a fuel tank, and an electric motor instead of an engine. You charge it. We'll talk about charging a little bit later, but all of the power that's used in the car is provided through electricity, so no combustion in them at all. The next, another type of electric car is called a plug-in hybrid. A good example of this is the Chevy Volt. And the way that these work and how they're different from a mild hybrid like an old Toyota Prius, is that they primarily will run on the electric motor and the battery, but they generally have a little bit of a smaller battery than a full electric vehicle, maybe only having somewhere between 12 and 40 miles of electric range. But then once the battery gets depleted, then you have a small engine that's able to kick in and either recharge the battery or provide direct power to the wheels. And so that is kind of an in-between technology, in between a hybrid and a fully electric car. I'm gonna try this, and I'm gonna give it one shot so I don't waste time. And if it doesn't work, then I will just tell the story. So let me open up this video that we made this summer, and if it's super laggy or the audio is not coming through, just turn on your audio and tell me it doesn't work, and I'll just explain it. Okay.
I grew up on the Gulf Coast, Houston, Texas. We would go to the beach and you would have to bring kerosene. And the kerosene was to clean off the tar that you would accumulate when you swam in the ocean. You would come out and you would have patches of tar all over you, and you would use kerosene to clean off the tar. And that was my experience of going to the beach. In 2015, I first had the inclination to at least check out buying an electric vehicle. A friend of a friend made a documentary called The Great Invisible about the Deep Horizon oil spill. This documentary focused on the people that live on the Gulf of Mexico and make their living either fishing or in the oil industry. And both of those industries were devastated after Deep Horizon. It hit me so hard. When we walked out of the theater, I told my husband, I'm never buying gasoline ever again. I don't want to contribute to this industry. And he said, what about getting an all-electric car? And I said, Well, you can't really do that though, right? I mean, how does that work? How do you take trips? How would we go visit friends in California? We're renters. Don't you have to have a charging station at your house? And I would say it took us a year of exploring all those hesitations that people have. My name is Amy Mitchell. I live in Bend, Oregon. I've lived here since 2001, and I'm a teacher. I teach high school science in Redmond. And I lived briefly in Redmond, but for most of my time in Central Oregon, I have commuted between Bend and Redmond. I now own a 2013 all-electric Nissan Leaf that has about 60 miles of range, depending on temperatures and elevation. And I use it to commute to my job every single day. When it came time to decide whether owning an electric vehicle could be a reality, we did a lot of research on what cars are out there. And when you initially examine your electric vehicle choices, I think people are drawn to Teslas. I'm a teacher, my husband works at a bike shop. That wasn't gonna work. Was there an option that was affordable for us? When we started looking at used electric vehicles, they're very reasonable. Then we looked at the cost of charging an electric vehicle, and it was significantly less than, I was spending $200 to $250 a month on gas. To charge our electric vehicle was about $50 a month. The cost that we did not understand at the time that we were going to save is maintenance. There's no oil changes. There's just so few things that can go wrong that was a very unexpected savings for us that we had not calculated into our purchase, and has afforded us the ability to take more vacations and buy more Central Oregon toys. So it's been a win-win for us economically. From the time that we thought for the first time about getting an electric vehicle to the day that we bought an electric vehicle was almost exactly 1 year. Our regret is that we waited that year. And we get the question often, well, should I buy an electric vehicle now, or should I wait for a longer range vehicle to become available at a more affordable price? And my answer is, buy one today, buy one right now, because yes, the technology will continue to get better, but what you use your car for on a day-to-day basis, an electric vehicle has everything that you need right now. If we could have saved those 12 months of me commuting 40 miles every single day in a gas-powered car, if I could have given one more year back to the earth, that sounds a little dramatic, but that's the way I think of it. I would have done it in a heartbeat. Had we known how easy it is to own an electric vehicle, I wish we had done it the day that the thought crossed our minds. So we encourage people who are EV curious to not wait and wonder what might be better around the corner. We have been renters much of our time living in Bend, and you have less control, less decision making as a renter. When we were considering an electric vehicle, we were pretty worried about how that would work as renters. When we found out that you do not have to install a charging station in your home, that alleviated most of that pressure from us as renters. Most apartments don't provide you with a garage. You're parking outside. How does that work? Do you run an extension cord from the building across a sidewalk to plug into your car? So we were pretty worried about becoming apartment dwellers and owning an electric vehicle. I'm really glad to say that the apartment that we're currently in, the management was extremely willing to work with us. They had had previous requests from tenants or potential tenants about where an electric vehicle could be charged. They also expressed to us that they knew that they would get more such requests in the future. So we have felt very well supported. I don't know that it would work well in every apartment situation, just to be perfectly honest. But we spoke up and advocated for ourselves, and it was because others before us had spoken up and advocated that our landlords were willing to say, you know, you are not the first to ask. Maybe this is something we should consider. Usually when we travel, we as a society, we're focused on our destination. It was definitely an adjustment to get away from that mindset. We bought our Leaf in Portland at about 6 o'clock at night on a Saturday night, and had to get home to Bend that night over Mount Hood in the dark. It was November, and we were just giddy. That first adventure, taking it from Portland to Bend, not knowing exactly what the range was. What we have found since is that most of the trips we do can be done in our electric vehicle. We drive to Coos Bay, where my husband's family lives, in our electric vehicle. And the journey is more fun because every 60 miles, you're at a charging station that might be at a winery or a cute little market or a rest stop, and you're out walking, you're getting a snack, you're a more rested, alert driver, and it makes the journey more of an adventure rather than I just have to get to Portland. We've really had a good time exploring the limits, I guess I would say, of our electric vehicle and how many adventures we can have in this car. I would say that buying an electric vehicle was not the first of my environmental choices, far from it, but it also has certainly not been the last. There are choices out there that are possible for commuters, for apartment dwellers, for people who want to live more lightly on the earth. So I think just having conversations about our electric vehicle has really made an impact in that those around us, we have lots of friends who have now purchased electric vehicles. One of my best friends has our identical car. We're little twinsies. He's also a coworker, and at work we park next to each other, and the students notice that. So just as a conversation starter and getting people to think about what they might choose to do, to even be aware of those choices has been really satisfying for us.
All right. So I'm glad you all got to virtually meet Amy Mitchell. She's a pretty great member of our community and teacher that has been a really good resource for us and can share some more of that personal story of how an electric vehicle fits into her world. Couple of quick notes before we jump too far out of that is that Amy and her partner Henry, they're a one-car household. They're renters. She has a long daily commute, and they're making all of that work in a vehicle that only gets 60 miles of electric range for like 5 years. They've since shifted and have, since we made that video, purchased a Chevy Bolt, which gets about 200 miles of range, but it's a pretty cool story to see what they've done there. So I will switch back to my presentation. Are you seeing the slide that says where are we now? Okay, wonderful. So this is a little bit of a graphic of some of the growth of electric vehicles that we've seen in Oregon in particular. This cuts off in about 2.25 years ago. So we're now at 32,000 electric vehicles in Oregon, and we're approaching, or we're about 1,200 in Deschutes County. So this is, we're seeing about 2% of sales of new cars, so it's not a ton, but it is a really growing segment, which is good to see. So so I'm going to go into a little bit of the details, and these are the questions that often come up. And so I'll just try to do those with graphics ahead of time, but then these are the kind of questions that I'd love to answer after the fact as well. So the first question that I often get is how does charging work? So there are 3 different main forms of charging. The first one is the one that Amy mentioned in that video. So it's called level 1 charging. So any vehicle, let's see, you can probably see that a little better. So any electric vehicle that you buy, new or used, will come with a charger in the car that can plug into just a regular wall outlet. And so most folks unless you're driving more than like 50 or 60 miles a day on average, individual days that are longer are fine. But unless you're driving more than that on average, most people can get away with just plugging into an outlet as long as you have a spot that you have easy access to it. The next level up are some of these. So this is that level 1 charger that came with the car, and that gives you a charge kind of overnight. The next level is called level 2. So you'll see that in public spots like the High Desert Museum here, some workplaces, hotels, and then also that's what some drivers will choose to install at their house. They cost a couple $100 and plug into like a dryer outlet, and they will get you about 20 miles of range per hour that you're plugged in. So great for, a stop at lunch or something that you're doing when you're driving around town, but not really something that you're going to want if you're on a longer drive. So that's where these road trip or DC fast chargers come in, level 3. So this is a map showing there's a lot of different ways that drivers will use to figure out how to go longer distances. But this is a map of all of the chargers that are Nissan Leaf, which is this cute little car in the corner, that we can use, and we can get about 80% of our battery charged in a half an hour on these chargers. And so what that means is with some of the longer range cars and these fast chargers, assuming you're going on a route with good chargers, you can have a typical total drive time similar to that of what you would be doing in a gas car. So that would mean if I'm driving to Seattle in a car with a 200+ mile range, I'm going to stop once for about 30 or 40 minutes, which is typically what I already do, to just be able to go to the bathroom or eat a snack or something like that. So that's a little bit about how the charging works. There was a question about range, and so this has changed a lot over time of what is available. So this is a little graphic of the average miles driven per day. So these are people that drive 15 miles. So this, if you combine them together, that 64% of the population drives less than 30 miles a day. And then when people get asked about how many miles they need in an electric car, it's always a weird calculation to try to figure out. But you can, the shortest range electric vehicles that are available new today have about 150 miles of range, with most somewhere between 200 and 300 miles of range. And that's without recharging, which is getting easier and easier as well. The next piece, this is kind of the background of how much it costs to drive an electric vehicle, because it's not free. I think an easy comparison is if you imagine that that your electric vehicle, you could fill up with electricity for about $1 a gallon. If you're used to thinking about gas prices, that would be about the savings that you'd expect, like between 75 cents and $1 per gallon. So then, this is another really important question that got asked ahead of time. And this is the question of, where's your power coming from, and is this better for the environment? The short answer is yes. It is better for the environment. You can get into a lot of detail of why that's the case, but this is a good question to ask, but you just need to find a trusted source and see where their evaluation lands. So when you're talking about fueling the vehicle, here are some specific examples from Oregon. So in Bend, I have Pacific Power, which is the dirtiest power in Oregon, still has a decent share of coal on in its resource mix. And if you compare driving a car 12,000 miles with Pacific Power electricity compared to driving it with gasoline, you're still between 1/3 and 1/2 the amount of emissions. And so it's this difference, this savings in carbon emissions, that are able to work away at some of the environmental impacts of mining batteries and some of those other concerns that you're able to kind of offset by how significantly less the impact is to drive. And the other cool thing about this graphic that you'll see is that we're getting better. Our electricity grid is getting a lot cleaner, and so once you start shifting from a dirtier power source to a cleaner power source like PGE, Oregon Average, or some of these co-op territory, if any of you are served by Central Electric Co-op, Midstate, or EWEB, then the emissions get drastically better. So we have to do both. We both have to electrify things. We also have to make the electricity cleaner, but that's a little piece of that there. There's a lot of different ways of looking at this, but you can look kind of more broadly. Even in some of the dirtiest parts of the grid, you're still having an equivalent. This is a little bit of a background on this one. One way of looking at this question is saying, at what miles per gallon would a car need to be better for you to drive the gas car than the electric car? So using that methodology, you'll see that there are some places in the country where if you're driving a car that gets better than 30 or 40 miles per gallon, then you would still be better off driving a gas car for now. But in places like our region, unless your car is getting over 100 miles to the gallon, an electric car is still the better bet. Another question in terms of the environmental impact is the end of life. And this is also a really important question that we should be asking with anything that we're buying. And this is particularly talking about batteries, because that's the biggest different component with an electric vehicle. So right now, what we're seeing in response to batteries at the end of their life is that they're still super valuable. So, it's different than the battery that you might have in your cell phone or your smoke alarm, where when it's dead, it's dead. With electric vehicle batteries, what we see instead is that they might start with 100% of their kind of stated range. And then after 10 years, they might have 90% of that available, or reduced over time. If that ever gets to a point where it's no longer usable for the car, so we're seeing this in some of the first generation Nissan Leafs, where they might have had a more degraded battery, then it's not getting thrown away. It's still a really valuable resource for energy storage, just maybe not in a car. So this graphic kind of demonstrates this a little bit, but I'll share a couple of examples of how that's being done right now. The first that's being done is that these battery packs are super valuable because people want battery storage for other things. So right now, all those used battery packs that are coming off of crashed cars or cars that have degraded batteries, they're getting taken apart and then re-put together into battery packs that are either used for grid storage, they're used for people that are converting other vehicles to electric, or they're being, if there's one battery that has 250 cells in it, it might be only a couple of cells that are bad. So people will pull those cells out, replace them with good ones, and then have a remanufactured battery pack that'll get installed into other vehicles. So that's pretty cool to see. Another example of this, the Nissan Leaf that we drive has a 70-mile range. And there's a shop in Portland that you could take our Nissan Leaf and say, hey, our battery, it's not meeting our need anymore. And they'll drop it off, they'll buy it from you, and then they'll install a larger battery pack. And so you could either get a battery pack that'll take you 110, 150, or 220 miles. And so we could upgrade our car with an updated battery pack that came off of somebody's car. So they're super valuable and are being used in a lot of different places before they ever have to start the recycling process, which is also growing, but it's challenging right now for that industry to grow because there really aren't batteries that are needing to be recycled very much. So here's just a little bit of an overview of different vehicles that are available. The first one, this Nissan Leaf, used first generation electric vehicles are now becoming much more affordable. So there's options there. There's about 5 or 6 models that have all-wheel drive. We're seeing more and more options with 200 plus miles of range, significant discounts. I love electric bikes, so that's also an option for an electric vehicle for some folks. This is a minivan that's a plug-in hybrid, so lots of those out there. The next section of my presentation is about incentives. I'm going to skip over most of it and just give the overview of the incentives in Oregon. Oregon has really good incentives. So the state has 2 different incentives. One is the standard rebate, which is $2,500. The second is charge ahead, which is an income qualified incentive, and that's available on new or used vehicles. And then there's still a federal incentive as well. So the general summary, I'll skip to that page, is that if you, this is busy, but this is the important thing. If you're buying a new electric vehicle in Oregon, you're either going to fall into a category, basically, regardless of whether you're a person, a business, regardless of your income, you will likely fall into a category of either $10,000 or $12,000 off of the list price of the car. The other really cool piece about this is if you are income qualified and are interested in a used electric vehicle, you can still get that $2,500 off from the state as a check that you receive. So it doesn't matter about your tax liability or anything like that. Okay, that was a lot of information. And I want to make sure that we have time for questions, and we're right coming up on 12:45. So
I can read the questions for you, Neil.
yeah, that would be great. So
Okay.
Yeah.
The first one looks like the chart you showed on personal emissions showed 26% due to purchases. The question was, is that the percentage including pickup and delivery by providers like Amazon?
Yes. So that was pretty early on in the presentation. This piece, the stuff you buy. And so that is, it's a piece that often isn't included in where carbon emissions happen. It's like it gets shifted, the responsibility gets shifted in other places. But yeah, that is the transportation or the creation and distribution of the stuff that you buy.
Okay. And it looks like another question is, there have been fires with lithium ion batteries used in e-bikes. Are they safer now? The lithium
Yeah,
ion.
so the fires that we see, or kind of safety is a really key point that I didn't really mention on here. I've paid more attention to electric vehicle or electric cars in terms of safety than I have electric bikes. So I don't have a super specific answer, but the general response that I've heard from the industry is that proper charging and proper using the right charging equipment with a modern electric vehicle, or electric bike, there's a lot of safeguards now. And so they were often third-party chargers or third-party bikes that were having that issue. And the same is true on the car side as well. They're also super durable.
Okay. So the next one is about the difference in price between electric buses and gas-powered buses. You addressed a lot of this with vehicles, but this is more related to buses.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, and is honestly a little bit different depending on transit buses and school buses. Right now, transit buses are starting to get to a point where they can be cost competitive over the life cycle of the bus. Electric school buses don't drive as many miles, so they don't get as much in terms of savings over the course of the year. And so grants and incentives are where we're seeing a lot of that growth. So an electric, a standard gas-powered school bus costs about $140,000 because I just went through this process. And an electric school bus costs like $375,000. So it's a significantly more expensive bus in terms of the upfront purchase price. And what the kind of stage of adoption that we're in right now is where school districts are getting some assistance to get them into the fleet, understand how they work, where they work, and where they could grow. And so they get help from either a utility or another grant to be able to get those into their fleet. So then as the price comes down, they have some kind of firm numbers to know where the cost savings are. Where the cost savings are. And then it's been interesting working on electric buses to see how many similarities there are to electric cars in terms of barriers and benefits. The maintenance is another really big piece. As diesel buses have more and more emissions controls on them, they require a lot more maintenance, which is a good thing. We don't want our diesel buses to be super reliable, but then spewing out a whole bunch of toxic emissions for our children. But some of that reduced maintenance is an added benefit for all of these vehicles. And I think Amy mentioned that in hers as well, but I think it's an interesting comparison. At the Environmental Center, we've had our Leaf for 4 years now. And besides putting snow tires on it in the winter, we've had to replace the windshield wiper fluid and our windshield wipers. And that's every dollar of maintenance that we've spent on our car in 4 years, which is a pretty awesome advantage that often gets forgotten.
So really significant savings in maintenance.
Yeah, and
also
just the convenience if you're not a car person to not have to think about it and mess it up is really nice. It just goes.
So you answered the next question with about an 80% charge if you have to recharge. This question is, if one is on a trip and stops for a recharge after 250 miles, how long will the charge take to go another 250 miles? So probably almost 100% recharge.
Yeah. So this gets to kind of the decision-making process when you're looking at an electric vehicle and figuring out which trips are feasible and which aren't. So for me, there's a lot of factors that come into play here. So whether you're charging to 80% versus 100%, how fast your vehicle charges, what kind of charger you're connected to, all matter here. And so what I typically like to do with this when I'm working with folks, because individuals that are interested, either at public events when we used to have those, or I'll set up a Zoom call and kind of talk through different options with folks. We can look at a map and say, what's the long that you are trying to do or the long trip that you somewhat regularly do. Maybe you have kids that live in Seattle, or you have parents that live in Boise or something like that. We can look and see what that looks like. The typical way, if you're trying to think about the range of the car beyond just, with one charging spout, the way that the vehicle charges, and my internet says it's unstable, so sorry if I get choppy. The battery will charge really quickly from 0 to 80%. And then from 80 to 100, it takes almost the same amount of time. And the reason is to protect the battery. So if you're doing longer trips, it's generally, the general strategy is to try to drive whatever 80% of the range is in between stops. So then you can go from maybe 10% to 80% at a charger, and then drive to the next charger and go from 10% to 80%. That's kind of the most efficient way to drive. And most folks aren't driving more than 400 or 500 miles in a day. And so a single stop charge with a 200 mile or 250 mile car typically can work for folks.
Okay. Hope we can get in the rest of the questions, Neil, without your
No worries. I'll try
internet
to answer
cutting out.
faster.
Okay.
I'm also happy to follow up with any questions afterwards.
Okay.
As well.
Yeah, that would be great, because we do a monthly newsletter, so I could publish answers in the monthly newsletter. We have a question here about the impact of heating the car during winter driving, and I would assume our counterpart to that question would be air conditioning during the winter or during the summer.
Yeah. So winter ranges, in practice, most people don't take as long of road trips in the winter than they do in the summer. But your range is definitely decreased with the heat on or the AC on. Depending on the car and how efficient those systems are, you're talking about somewhere between 10 and 20% different. And that's partially because an electric vehicle, because it's so much more efficient to drive, there's not a whole bunch of waste heat like there is in a gas-powered car. And so you're having to actually run a heater, which uses some of the power in the battery. But on the flip side of that, one of the really great things about an electric vehicle in the winter is that it's plugged in, and if it's in the garage or on the street, you can tell it to warm up before you get in it. And so if you're not having to eke out the range on a long road trip, you can start with your car warm before you leave, which is really nice in the winter. And you don't have to worry about opening the garage or idling and having making your neighbors upset that you're idling the car on the street. So it's a really fun car to have in the winter as well.
Okay. Then I have a question about batteries. Someone is wondering exactly how easy is it to reuse the batteries and to recycle them and to know where to take them.
So for car batteries, it's not something that individuals usually are dealing with in terms of where you take it. That's happening when the vehicle gets sold for scrap. Then that's just a really valuable component that they're taking off and selling into the market. There's actually a guy in Alfalfa that's one of like the region's top EV battery refurbisher and recyclers or refurbishers. And then, yeah, so that's kind of where it's at. We don't have a super robust recycling industry right now, just because honestly, there aren't very many batteries to be recycled. Yeah. Okay.
A counterpart to that is when you do recycle a battery and then replace a battery in your vehicle, how much can you expect a new battery to cost?
It's a really good question. So I think the Nissan Leaf, if you wanted to replace it with the same size battery, I want to say it was $2,000 to get the battery replaced, including labor at the shop in Portland. But then you could also pay for the upgrades as well. So you could get a larger battery if you wanted a longer range car. I think we're seeing battery chemistry get a lot better as well. I don't think we're very far from expecting new batteries to last way longer than a car ever would. There are taxi fleets driving Teslas that have driven a 250,000 miles on batteries that still are on the original battery, original motors. And so I think we'll see that in the future. So I think we're kind of in a 10-year timeline where that's going to not always be the case. But
okay, so it sounds like it's becoming less and less of a concern.
And also, going from a 70-mile range to a 50-mile range makes a lot more difference than going from 250 to 220. I don't know, personally, that that buffer makes a much bigger difference with the smaller range cars. I think you'll see longer range cars, just people being okay with buying a 200-mile range car.
Here's a question about the worldwide predictions regarding the long range availability of lithium.
Yeah, so this is there is a lot of growth in battery technology. So for grid storage, with being able to allow more renewables on the grid, with vehicles and other technology, there's a lot of increased pressure on the raw materials. So the way that we see that right now is just we're seeing battery prices decrease a ton through a lot of efficiency and technology. But yeah, we're definitely pushing the limits of existing supply of some of those materials.
Okay. The map that you showed about the charging station availability was really interesting because it's definitely along the I-5 corridor and on 97 going north from Bend, but it looked like it was noticeably lacking in southern and eastern Oregon. And I'm wondering to see if you can speak to the upcoming availability of charging stations throughout more rural Oregon.
Yeah, me too. I've spent a lot of work in that arena. There are a lot of people trying to solve those issues, and even some updates that have happened that aren't on that map. So some electric utilities have installed charging in Baker City, Burns, and I'm forgetting the name of the other town, but we're seeing more. We're also seeing some charging south of us. And there's some funds that are available to actually update the stations that are already there to provide more power to them in multiple stations. So we're definitely seeing the growth, and there's opportunities. Those are really important things to mention that are important to legislators making decisions about budgeting and ODOT, because those are not the same concerns or frustrations that are experienced by people living in the I-5 corridor. I think we have a lot more in common than we have different, but those are significant concerns that just need to be shared. ODOT is going through a statewide process right now of trying to evaluate where those gaps are and figure out how to make sure that we get them filled. But it is, it's an ongoing process.
Okay. So we have a couple more minutes. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any more in chat. Okay, I'd like to thank you for your time, Neil. This was incredibly valuable information. The presentation has been recorded, so it'll be available on our YouTube site for people who couldn't attend the meeting. But I really thank you for your time because I know you're really busy. And it was nice meeting you at one of the farmers markets because you were the one that actually suggested offering this presentation to the League of Women Voters. One thing I remember at the farmers market is you had a nice 2-page handout of the electric vehicles available in Oregon. And if you can send that to me, I'll include that in our newsletter in the coming month, because I think that would be really interesting to people too, because most people think of the Nissan Leaf, but there were probably almost a dozen different manufacturers making electric vehicles.
Yeah. And that's, I think, one of the key messages that I like to share is that there's a lot of vehicles out there that can meet a lot of different needs. And it's also a weird thing to talk about because not everybody's in the market for a new car. I don't want to be a car salesman. It feels really weird. And so just, that's not the point of the presentation. The real point is just to try to help understand in a rapidly changing world of transportation options, just catch up a little bit. And also know that there's resources out there. So after I've given presentations like this, people or their kids or spouses or random acquaintances will send me an email or call me and say, hey, we're really considering XYZ, but we're concerned about this. Or I'm really interested in this. Do you know somebody in town? I know that there's not a dealership that carries this in town. Do you know anybody here that might be willing to show me their car? So we're trying to provide those connections within the community so then we can really kind of help move this forward. So please feel free. I'll send you that handout and my contact info, and please feel free to pass that around if you know people that you think could be helpful to talk to me.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that availability. That's really
Yeah.
helpful. I really appreciate that.
And I just put my ballot in the mail too. So thank you all for your, I really appreciated the seeing you in person at the farmers market. That was the only in-person event I did in 2020. Yeah, it's I'm glad I was able to connect with you all, and that this timing worked out great.
Okay. Yeah, and again, thank you for fitting us in. It's 1:02 now, and I know that you have a jam-packed schedule, so I really appreciate your meeting with us.
Yeah, you bet. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks a lot, Neil.
Thank you. Okay, Karen, that was great, and so many good questions. It's like, you always just amaze me on how much I don't know.